So I'm going to try and produce some noises here. So maybe you can identify these noises might be the same as what you're hearing on your bike and crank. So a little bit more there initially. That was a big one right there. So with this system here, I noticed when I took a look at it, started putting my hands on it when I was out on the trail, I was pushing left and right, trying to produce some pressure, and I actually noticed that the crank arm was actually pivoting side to side, just a few millimeters, but that was enough. It shouldn't do that at all. We shouldn't get any side to side movement. So something came loose and started to create some creaking. Because of that looseness, it had the ability to move around. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment. If you like what you see, leave a thumbs up. Something I didn't do or I didn't get to, just go ahead and leave that comment as well. Don't forget to subscribe if you like what you see. So there's a few different tools we can use for this Hollowtech style bottom bracket. This is a Park Tool BBT-9. It's actually a 2-in-1 tool, which is going to work perfectly. This end right here has a little star shape right there. That's going to fit inside our preload adjusting nut right there, just like that. And we're going to unscrew that. This is typically only hand tight, so it shouldn't be very tight at all. Once we unscrew that, then we have access to 5mm bolts, one on this side, one on that side. Those are pinching the metal shut. We're going to be using a 5mm Allen tool for that. Once we get that apart, then we have access to outboard style bottom bracket. This one is a press fit, so there's no outboard style, meaning the bearings are sitting inside the frame. They're not sitting just outside the frame. We can't see it right now. So that's where this tool would come in. So it's a nice 2-in-1 tool for that type of setup. So my other favorite tool is another Park tool. It's this is a Park Tool BBT-10. I call it the little butterfly. Mainly meant for this preload adjusting cap. This cap is typically plastic. You might find some aluminum. It's gonna fit in there perfectly. You're gonna unscrew it, and then you can put an actual 5mm tool right here if that plastic cap's a little tight. You could even stick a screwdriver in one of these holes and use that to open up it as well. But we're going to unloosen our 2 pinch bolts on this left side crank arm first, and then we'll be able to unscrew this preload cap really easily. So we got a pinch bolt access, one right here, one on the other side. So I'm going to use this Allen wrench, 5mm, break it free. And if you have trouble getting your tool in there, there might be some dirt inside there. I'm gonna make sure that tool sits in nice and deep. Break that free. I'm gonna loosen this maybe a few turns. We don't need to take it out completely. And then you have a bolt over on this side that will break free. And unscrew that a few more turns. Now this little area has opened up. It's gonna allow this preload adjusting cap to come out much easier. Shimano did another safety thing right here. So right in between there's a slit where the metal has actually cut open. There's going to be a piece of plastic that's hooked over. We need to flip that hook upward. That way it will allow us to slide this whole crank arm off. So the next step is to flip this little plastic hook up, and I'm using a small little flathead screwdriver. This is my one I use. It's almost like a easy pry tool. The end is real dull. So I'm going to come in right in between the end of the cap and this little crack here and slide that little piece of plastic up. We got quite a bit of dirt in there, but that hook, that's about all it rises up. It doesn't rise up any higher. You do it any higher, you're probably going to break it. It's not a real strong piece of plastic, but this is another safety item. Just in case our 2 pinch bolts come loose, we lose our preload adjusting cap. Crank arm would actually really want to come off, but with this little hook, it's holding on to the shaft of the other side of the crank, and hopefully you notice that it's wiggling before it actually falls off. So just another safety item. So now that that's popped up, I'm going to use my little preload adjusting cap, my little butterfly. Like I said, it's not very tight, because most likely I actually tightened it up on the trail a little bit. So now that we have that loose, we can put that aside. Now this arm is ready to come off. Make sure that piece of plastic is still upward. And usually I like to grab down here at the crank arm, and you're gonna grab up here at top, right about there, and you're just gonna kind of push, pull, wiggle, wiggle, just like that. And that crank arm comes off, just like that. So we got splines here, we got splines inside there. That's how it grabs onto it. And there's really only one way to do it. So a little hard to see, but there is an actual hole on the top here, and that's where this little piece of plastic, once it gets pushed down, there's a small pin that comes down, enters that hole, and just acts as a little safety and holds on to dear life so that the guy doesn't fall off. So now with this system, we need to check the chain off if we could. Let's see, I do have a single ring here. It also has a little chain guide right there. So my chain guide, I'm gonna have to move it out of the way. If you didn't have that, you can go ahead and push your rear derailleur, your lower pulley wheel forward. That's gonna create some slack here in the chain. Then you can go ahead and unwrap it off of your front chainring. If you have a clutch style, like most Shimano and SRAM derailleurs now have the clutch style. So if you have a Shimano, you wanna turn your switch off. If you have a SRAM, you're going to push this forward, hold it, and there'll be a button right about here. You're going to push that button, hold that button, then you can release, and it'll actually hold this for you and makes the whole derailleur somewhat limp, and then you have lots of slack here, and it'll be easier to take that off. But Shimano, we're just turning the switch down, and it allows us to push much easier rather than have a lot of stress. So before I can take this chain off, that way I can release it from the crank arm, I can pull this out. If you have a little setup like this is an MRP. I'm gonna use this bolt right here and loosen that. Now once it's loose, I can slide it up and down, but that's not enough. I'm going to take the screw fully out. Now this piece of plexus is going to come apart. Try not to drop any pieces. And my bolt should follow. There we go. So now I have access to get my chain out. We'll leave this guy in place. Now I can go ahead and push on my lower pulley wheel, create some chain slack, get some chain slack. Now I can come and unwrap this chain here and just let that sit. Or you can just let it hang right there. Cool, now we're free. I'm gonna have to remove the rest of these pieces here. Yeah, that'll slide right up. Okay, now we're ready to pull this drive side crank arm off. So we're grabbing it somewhere right about here, getting at least 3-4 fingers on it, and you're gonna pull straight out this way. And if it comes out on its own, great. Like this just did, it cooperated, awesome. But sometimes they don't cooperate. Sometimes these are stuck, so we're gonna use a rubber mallet or something soft, plastic. We're gonna hit the other side where that little piece of crankshaft was hanging out. We're gonna give it a little love tap. So as I'm pulling here, keeping pressure, give it a tap over on this side, boom, it'll come right out. So this is a drive side. We just pulled the crank arm off that had the chainring on it, and we're looking at this filthy area right here that usually gets ignored because we can't see it. We're usually not paying attention because it's working fine until it's not. So we got a little bash guard right here by MRP, and here is our inside internal bearing. So this is the press fit style. We can see just a little bit of it sticking outside the frame, the black portion, and then we go into the red metal bottom bracket, which is our frame there. So this got pressed in, the bearings are sitting on the inside. See, I can spin the inside independently from this outside here. I'm gonna wipe this down a bit. So these are the areas, when you are washing your bike, you don't want to use high pressure. You're going to get into areas that you may not see, but the water's going to get in, and it could push all this dirt into the fine seams, contaminating your bearings, basically wearing them out before they actually needed to be worn out. So get your finger in there, give it a good spin, and it's actually spinning really smooth. If you feel it kind of gritty and crunchy, then probably got lots of dirt inside the seal cartridge bearing, and you can either ride it a few bit more, get a few more rides out of it, or you can know that you have to replace it pretty soon. But I'm feeling smooth like butter. You're gonna feel a little bit of resistance, especially if it's on the newer side. A lot of times we're just pushing grease around, so that's totally normal to feel just a little bit of resistance, but it's gotta be smooth, just like butter. And you're gonna check the other side as well, give that a spin. So both sides feel pretty good, so I'm happy with that. And what you do wanna do is you wanna wipe everything down, get all the grit, get all the grease out of there. Usually I'm just using rags. Continue to change out your rags, get it nice and clean in there. I wouldn't necessarily squirt any degreaser in this area because it could seep into the sealed cartridge bearing. You know, they're not 110%, you know, waterproof. So we don't want especially we don't want the degreaser to get in there and break down the grease prematurely as well. So, but while you're here, you can take a look at other things. You could probably get to some pivot bolts on your suspension that you couldn't get to before. Get a tool on both sides, make sure they're tight, check your torque specs for that. Make sure you're, if you have any chain guides or bash guards in this area, you got 1, 2, 3 bolts, that those are nice and tight. So now that we got this crank arm off, we can take a look at it. On the inside, you can inspect your teeth on here. This is a narrow, wide tooth. So every other tooth is going to be fat or narrow or thin. And you can check your tightness of your bolts here. If you feel that they're a little creaky, then we could always disconnect, take your bolts off, re-grease your threads. You can go either way, grease or thread locker. I tend to go with grease. I haven't had any issues with it. I know grease is probably going to be a little bit more easier to take take the bolt off when I'm ready. Thread locker, you might have to fight this. If you overuse thread locker, could get stuck real bad, and then you could potentially strip your bolts out. But here is the shaft here for, this is the Hollowtech. It's a hollow tube, and you can just go ahead and wipe all this stuff down. And we're gonna re-grease everything too. So get that nice and clean. So your bearing's riding right here on the inside here, and then your bearing's riding right about here. And if you look closely on yours, you're gonna see a little polished area, and then it gets dull, and then polished over on this end here. And then over here we have all the tiny little splines. And then as far as thickness, or diameter wise, this shaft, forgot what it was offhand, but it's going to fit perfectly right inside here. And making this, I believe could be a 24 or 25 millimeter. So that can change depending what you're running. You're running either a Shimano or raised face, that thickness could change, which means your bottom bracket size can change as well. So a lot of variety with the press fits, and sometimes that could be a pain in the butt. It's always easier to go with the external outboard style bottom bracket where you're just threading it in here. So pretty universal. You can swap it from bike to bike pretty easy, not worrying about size.